everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're actually a long time subscriber, you know I used to make these kinds of videos. If you only just subscribed, you've only seen the vlogs most likely. But in this video, we're going to be talking about why I bought the C100, which is what you guys are actually watching me through, and why I think it is actually a worthwhile investment in 2018 or going into 2019. If you're unsure what the C100 is, it's actually a cinema camera made by Canon. It's a very old camera, I'm not entirely sure of the release date, and it gets overlooked a lot just because of its age. But in this video, I wanted to go over why I actually bought this camera about 10 months ago and why I still like it to this day, and it's the main camera I shoot with. But with the camera being old, it does have some drawbacks, so I'm going to go over them as well. But the first point I want to make is that this is a dedicated video camera. It's a cinema camera, so it's not a DSLR. DSLRs can shoot photo and video, and cinema cameras only shoot video. Now the reason why this is important is that all the buttons and all the functions are all dedicated to video. It's not interrupted by different photography features that you don't need when you're shooting video. For example, the way that this camera is designed to be held and used is specifically made for video because of the handle on the side with the record button right up the top, and you got your dials on that handle as well. But it's also got some other cool features in it for a camera that you can buy for around about $2,000 Australian. It's got Zebra, which is normally found in higher grade cameras. And if you don't know what that is, you can set it to tell you when something is overexposing in your shot. So it's a lot easier for you to see when your shots are overexposed and see when they're actually correctly exposed. It also shows you where your focus is with little red lines. As you can see in this shot here, you can tell that my focus is directly up the front on the object, and it's not anywhere else because that's where the red lines are showing where that focus is. And that makes a lot of difference, especially when you're outside in the sun and you can't exactly see the screen and see exactly where you're shooting, especially if you're shooting with a shallow depth of field. It can become really hard to actually see where your focus is, and this is a super important thing that I definitely recommend. If you're choosing between cameras and one camera has this and one camera doesn't, I would definitely be going for the one that has this because it's a huge advantage. But another thing, I use this camera mainly for YouTube. I also use it for professional shoots as well, but it gets used a lot in my YouTube videos. And something that's really helpful with this, because it is slightly older, it actually has dual SD card slots instead of compact flashes or any of the other super expensive cards out there. This just uses normal SD cards, which actually makes it really easy for me to transfer it onto my computer and actually buy multiple SD cards, because if you're trying to buy multiple compact flashes or any of those types of things, the prices can skyrocket really quick and becomes really expensive. And another point I want to make is, because this camera is designed to shoot movies on, the battery life is incredible. It lasts all day. I never have an issue with it. I only have one battery and I've never run out of battery. They're quite large and quite chunky, but that's actually a really good thing because, as I said, I've never run out of battery on a shoot and I've only ever brought one battery with me. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the dynamic range of this camera. For its age, it is pretty good, and for a Canon, it's definitely really good, because normally Canon's dynamic range is really not that great, especially when compared to Sony's. Now, it's nothing on something like a Sony a7S II or an a7 III or anything like that, but it's got decent enough dynamic range where I'm happy with the shots I can get from it in correct lighting. It's not going to be able to shoot in pitch black like an a7S II or whatever. It's not designed to do that. It's designed to have proper lighting like in this video. I've actually talked about this in previous videos, how this camera has a pretty flat profile and how that's good for color grading. You can actually check that out in this video up here. It's a video of me talking about how to film four-wheel drives, but it also talks a lot about dynamic range. I think I need to dedicate a whole video to dynamic range and explain how it all works in color profiles. As I said earlier in this video, you can pick this camera up for around about $2,000 secondhand. Now that is incredibly cheap for a camera. Now keep in mind, I am talking about the C100 Mark I, not the Mark II. The Mark II has dual pixel autofocus, which is absolutely incredible, but the autofocus on the C100 Mark I is a push button autofocus, and it's really not that good. I'd never use it. I only use manual focus on this camera just because the autofocus is really not that great, but if you get the one with the dual pixel autofocus, that is the best autofocus going around. But I picked up this camera with a lens for just over $2,000, and it was in used condition. Like, there's little marks on it, but nothing that actually affects the performance of this camera. And it's definitely saved me from lots of different shoots, like being able to have two cameras now, obviously, but having this camera that is a cinema camera, when you rock up on shoots, people will actually see this camera because it's quite a large camera and they think, oh, this guy actually knows what he's doing. It's better than rocking up with like a little Sony. I know it's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but it really does make a difference. I've been out shooting with one of my friends and he's got a Sony A7 II, I think. And people always ask me what I did for film and not him, just because I had this huge camera in my hand, but he had a little Sony. It may sound like a weird thing to touch on, but it is kind of important when you're in the professional kind of field. Not so much for YouTube, but if you're looking at this to make a film or do product advertising or anything for other companies, it's actually kind of a good thing to look like you have really professional gear, even if it isn't super high grade, if that makes any sense. But another reason why I personally think that this is a good camera to get, especially if you're starting out like I was when I bought it, it really teaches you how to use a camera properly, because it gets rid of all the photo functions and all the distractions of everything else, and you learn exactly what is required for video and film. And even without having the autofocus, I can still manage to get really good shots just by hand and manually focusing and doing follow and tracking shots, just because I've been using it a lot. It's a lot easier to use for an extended period of time than a DSLR. And it's also just small enough that once you take off the other attachments that come with it, that it can fit on a gimbal. I actually had this on a DJI Ronin M, and I sold that and I actually put it on the Zhiyun Crane 2, which is behind me over here, and it works perfectly on that, as long as there isn't a super heavy lens on it, like the 24-105, which is up there. That's a heavy-ish lens. It just gets a little bit front heavy for the Zhiyun Crane 2, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it can actually fit on a gimbal, unlike most cinema cameras these days, just because they're super heavy. And it does get I need the dual handles for that one, because my arms are killing me by the end of the day. But I also want to touch on some of the bad things about this camera, and it mainly does have to do with its age. One is how fast it processes everything. It's quite incredibly slow. When you first turn on the camera, you have to wait a good 30 seconds before you can actually click the record button, which is a really long time, especially if you're on a run and gun shoot. So that means you just kind of gotta leave it turned on just in case you have to quickly press that record button, because no joke, it actually takes 20 to 30 seconds before you can actually click the record button. I've already touched on the bad autofocus in the Mark 1. It is just atrocious. I would not be using it one bit, but if you get the Mark 2, it costs about an extra grand or two, I think, to get that. But I would definitely say if you're considering getting this camera as a long-term investment, it's definitely a good idea to go for the dual pixel autofocus. Another thing that really annoys me about this camera is that I can't shoot slow motion at all. Like, you can shoot maximum of 30 frames per second, and that doesn't really look as good as 24 frames per second if you record in 30 and slow it down, just because, I don't know, the quality is different. But it can't even shoot 50 frames per second or 60 frames. If it shot 60 frames, I would be happy, but it can't shoot any kind of slow motion whatsoever, any usable slow motion. So that's definitely a big bummer, having this like nice big fancy camera and then not being able to shoot slow motion. I know you wouldn't really use slow motion in movies, which is what this is designed for, but sometimes when I'm out shooting with it, I'd really love to have slow motion. So after all this, the question is, should you buy this camera? And I think this camera now exists for a certain type of audience, like what I was. I was looking at new cameras, but all the new ones were so expensive, and then all the cheaper ones didn't do video that were that great. They took amazing photos, but the video side was kind of lacking. And then I stumbled across this one. It was for sale. It was about, as I said, around the $2,000 mark, with a lens, and I just snapped it up straight away because I was like, yep, a cinema camera is gonna look better than what I could buy a DSLR for around about the $2,000 mark, and that wouldn't even come with a lens. And I think for what I was doing, I was starting up my own business, starting up this YouTube channel. I think it was a great investment for me, especially with the YouTube side of things, because if I'm out filming, like especially with the 4-wheel drive videos, I pull this camera out on the gimbal and everyone's like, oh, geez, that's a big camera, that's a big setup, what's your YouTube? I want to check it out. That actually happens a lot. Whereas if I just had a normal like Canon camera or a small Sony or something like that, people don't really notice you that much. So that can be a good or a bad thing. If you're trying to film inconspicuously, you can't, because the camera's like this big. Take that for whatever you want to take that for, but I think it's perfect for up and coming YouTubers that are doing cinematography and that kind of thing. And if you're looking to get into film as a business, for filming for other companies and advertising, things like that, because it's a great way to get into the cinema camera market as well. But that's going to do for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be making more kind of tutorial and gear overview review kind of things. If you want me to go more in depth on how I actually use this camera, please let me know down in the comments below. If you have any questions, hit me up as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.